Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Mystery Theory. Today is Soft Spoken Wednesday that we skipped last week because of the 5-part series on Jan's documentary Abducted in Plain Sight. If you missed it and you do not care for soft spoken videos, you can check it out. It will be on the top of the screen right now. Now, today it's another episode in the series of the butterfly effect. There's a lot of you guys that that really got into this series because, and I do too, because it involves a mix of our history and as a world, and also involves how decisions or things that not necessarily you would think of can change completely the route, the way that things were going. I think in my last butterfly effect video, I share with you guys the Vietnam War and how, because of a meeting not happening, how Vietnam then had to be loyal to Russia, and I think it's a perfect combination because I'm the kind of person that's why I love so much true crime and mysteries from history, because you always can learn something. You can always learn either a behavior that you see and then after a case it makes sense in a different way, and it helps you be more cautious around normal everyday things like we talked about last week. And if it's part of history, I like to know it, because when somebody comes to me and tries to sell me an idea of this is happening because of this or this person, if I have the history in my brain, then it's easier for me to decide for myself. Is this true? Is this, does this make sense with what really happened in history? So I think overall, this kind of mysteries from history, and including the butterfly effect, it really helps us see things that we know happened, but how they happened. Now, today's episode, it's going to be titled the same way that I found it, because this was an article that I was reading, and it's how a refugee made George W. Bush president. Again, we're not taking this from a political view, because I'm not going to get into that. But how can something so simple really change the way things were going at the time? And this story starts with an immigrant, and this was a 6-year-old boy who lived with his uncle Lázaro. Now, he is a Cuban refugee, and the nephew is only 6 years old at the time. So, it started with a raid from federal agents who ended up taking this 6-year-old under custody. Now, if you've ever been to Florida, you know that Cubans have a big influence in the way that they live. I mean, I had some of the best coffees in the world when we went to Florida many years ago. And it's kind of interesting to see the mix of culture, the Cuban culture with, there's a lot of people from Puerto Rico, and it's just in so much tourism that it's such an interesting place to visit. The time they just couldn't believe that they would take this 6-year-old boy, so they went to the streets, they protested, they wanted the agents to let him go, but he ended up in custody for 2 months, and then he was sent back to Cuba. So he was in the custody of the government for 2 months and then sent back. Now, I'm not going to go into details of the Cuban-US deal, because there is a lot of things that really, and we're talking about the year 2000 when this happened, okay? So there was a lot going on at the time. The Twin Towers were still okay, but the US was going through a different kind of struggle, and this kind of things were happening more and more often. So it was really something that made the people in the area really not only upset, but wanting to get revenge in this thing that happened with a 6-year-old boy. The president at the time was Bill Clinton, as you probably remember. But it was kind of interesting to know that most Cubans, when they move to the US, they do become US citizens eventually. And they're very active in their voting. So the combination of Bill Clinton doing that and, a lot of those people protesting were American citizens. It was just a big political issue. Now, if you want to know about this 6-year-old boy, his story, it's really sad. His mom left Cuba, and most of them lives in rafters and whatever they can find to go in the ocean. And she left because she wanted to protect her and give her son a better life. But his mom died. She drowned in the effort of saving her kid and giving him a better life. And he was found the Thanksgiving before this, and he was clinging to the inner tube of the coast of Fort Lauderdale. So, as you can probably imagine, the frustration of people knowing that his mom at this point died in vain. Now he not only was back in Cuba, but he was alone. He didn't have his mother, and now his situation is much, much worse. So the Cuban American community wanted revenge. So the next election on November 7th, they were pretty close, and it was George W. Bush and Al Gore, the opponent, Democratic Party. It was a neck-to-neck kind of thing, but a lot of people, and the thought was that Al Gore was going to win. In a few words, I mean, there's a lot more to that, but in a few words, that was the situation at the time. So they were neck to neck, and they needed to win Florida. Now, if you ask me how that works, I'm not going to explain it to you because I can barely understand it myself. But there is a system, and at the end, if you were watching the last elections, at least in my house, we spent all night just, what happened to this date? What happened to this date? What happened to this date? It gets a little bit overwhelming at the end, but they needed to win Florida if they wanted, whoever wanted to be president. And guess what? Our friends, the Cuban community, was there too. And Al Gore was the vice president for Bill Clinton, so he was somewhat held responsible for what happened to this 6-year-old boy. I think it happens all the time, right? Something horrible happened under somebody's lead, and then all of a sudden everyone is a bad person, everyone is a bad. And in this case, that's exactly what happened. Now, the results: President Bush won Florida for 537 votes out of the 6 million that were cast. A simple change of plans, something that shouldn't have happened at that time, really changed completely. And I remember reading this article and people asking, what would have happened on 9/11 if Al Gore was president? Well, for Bush, it's the beginning of the war of terror that has claimed so many lives and so many young people that have been fighting in this very, very long war. So, I guess it even happens in politics. Sometimes we think that flap of a butterflies' wings are just things that happen to us. Normal people that we decided to go into a different route to go to work, or that we chose to do something different and it ended up costing us. Well, I think this proves that it happens in even the biggest of situations or scenarios, and that is part of how the universe, the world, humanity works. And I guess that if I'm going to share what I truly believe, which is my personal opinion, and you don't have to agree with me, but it's our free will. We are free to choose whatever we want to do. And sometimes it's exhausting to make decisions, to keep things in mind. What am I gonna eat today? What am I gonna, it gets to the point that even the silliest things become a decision that we have to make. And decisions are decisions, but what we get out of decisions in the bigger scheme of free will that I'm sharing with you today, that it's my personal belief, there are consequences. There always are consequences. There are good consequences, bad consequences, but there's always consequences for every single thing, every single decision that you make. That is why I hate to make a decision, because I overthink them over and over and over, because I want to think of every possible scenario, and that is stressful, and sometimes it even freezes you, like you don't know what to do, because every single scenario that you thought of was, I don't know, scary. But I feel like in this case, they gave too much responsibility for Clinton at the time. I think that we must understand that even if we agree with our leaders or we don't agree, they're not the ones calling all the shots, just some of them. They can't decide everything that happens. And as I tell my kids all the time, I am so glad that I never considered the idea of having some kind of a political or and believe me, I was very active back home. We would occupy our high school every 6 months or so because of the bad wages to the teachers, because of the budget that we had. I mean, I've always been involved somehow, but now I understand the kind of responsibility that you get when you're in the power. And you're responsible for so many people. And you are so, you're expected to be making the right decisions all the time. And that's why we have a group of leaders, because one person can't really make all the decisions. It would be impossible for somebody to run a country, run the states. I mean, how? How can you make the decisions for everyone? The leaders wouldn't have enough minutes, hours, days in a year to make all those decisions. So in my opinion, sometimes we are quick to come to conclusions, to find somebody to hold responsible for what we don't like and what is going on in our lives, in our communities, in our state, in our country. When overall, it's a bunch of leaders that you probably don't even know their names. People that advise our leaders. And the different leaders in different areas of a country. So, this is one of those cases that I'm like, it did happen, or it did help President Bush to become a president. But in my opinion, it was meant to be. If it wasn't for this 6-year-old boy, it would have been something different that he did, or somebody did, while he was president, to hold him responsible for it and go to the opponent. I am not saying that this is right or wrong, but can we see a pattern? Can we see that sometimes we are so desperate in situations that are unfair, like in this case for a 6-year-old boy, that instead of doing something, sometimes we just try to find somebody to blame. And in this case, finding that person to blame kind of changed the way that things were going. at the time. So again, the butterfly effect at work, even in the big scheme of things. I don't know much about this boy. I hope that he's either back in some way, shape, or form, or that he found happiness. Because we decided, that's what I'm going to close this video with. We decided, our president at the time, but what we don't think about is how it changed, what happened to this little 6-year-old boy that lost his mother. So maybe he is responsible for President Bush to, winning this election in 2000. But what about the butterfly effect for this little 6-year-old boy? What triggered the raid that took him? Sometimes we get so focused on the bigger scheme things that we forget that the devil's in the details. And this detail was 6-year-old, and it was a little boy who didn't ask to come here, but was brought by his mom, who happened to lose her life. So for those of you who are like, well, the butterfly, it's always working the way that it should, so things can happen. Yes. But sometimes there are these casualties. There's things that we should keep in mind. And not because he was an immigrant or because he was Cuban, but because he was a human being. And I hope he is. I'm talking in past, but you know what I mean. Sometimes I feel like we lose track of the most important thing, or the most important things are not things. So, again, it's not about politics. It's not about parties. It's about respecting life. And it's about thinking about what we can do better. I hope that you enjoy this little piece of history, this unsolved mystery of the butterfly effect, that you learned something, that you can keep in mind these little things that happen next time that something big is going on. And I will see you back here on Friday for a whispered, different, but still in the butterfly effect theme. I'll see you back here on Friday. Bye, guys.